Welcome. Imagine a 1,000-year-old crime scene where the clues have long been washed away by time. The witnesses have crumbled to dust, and the history books just repeat the official cover story. Today, we embark on a journey that will rewrite everything we thought we knew about the Hungarian past. Based on Endre K. Grandpierre's work, The Secret History of the Hungarians, we will peek behind the dark scenes of history. Stay with me. History is not just a boring collection of dates and names. The author points out that the life of nations has a unique pulse, a rhythm, which is most comparable to the beating of a human heart. If a nation is healthy and in a rising phase, the heartbeat is calm, and kings rule for a long time. But what happens when the rhythm suddenly speeds up? When the reign shrinks to just a few years and stormy events follow one after another? The official version says this is all just a coincidence. Mathematical and historical logic, however, establishes the real diagnosis. Stress, crisis, and a series of artificial interventions, meaning political serial murder, are behind it. Let's look at the cold, hard facts, the faceless numbers that make a shocking confession. During his statistical investigation, the author finds amazing anomalies. If we take 60 years as the optimal lifespan of a king, we find a brutal lifespan deficit among the rulers of the House of Arpad. Out of the 23 Arpad kings examined, 22 did not reach this optimal age, and half of them didn't even make it to 33. In total, more than 500 years of royal lifespan disappeared down the drain. In contrast, during the Habsburg era, almost half of the kings happily lived to 60 or beyond, and their lifespan loss was only 26 years. What happened in the Arpad era? Was there some genetic curse on the dynasty? Not at all. They were robust, tough, healthy men. The truth is much darker. The Hungarian throne in that period was practically an uncomfortable electric chair. The strangest and most tragic phenomena of this dark age were the child kings. Why put a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old child on the throne? The answer is cynically simple. A child does not belong on the throne, because that makes them a perfect puppet king, in whose name power-hungry cliques and foreign interest groups can rule from the shadows. But puppet kings have a very bad habit. They grow up. When such a ruler reached manhood and tried to stand on his own 2 feet, he entered an invisible crisis zone, and mysteriously, death caught up with him almost immediately. It is a telling fact that during the 4 centuries of Habsburg rule, not a single child king occurred. Of course, the rhythm of history didn't go crazy on its own. The author identifies huge hidden fault lines, which are like tectonic cracks in the Earth's crust. One of the biggest such ruptures occurred after the death of Saint Stephen. After the great king closed his eyes, the power of the once feared Hungary declined, and it found itself in the international meat grinder. The German Empire and the Byzantine Empire, like 2 huge sharks, began to devour the country from both sides. The 11th and 12th centuries were one endless crisis, full of internal bleeding, foreign expansion, and incredibly rapid changes of kings. Foreign powers realized that they could achieve much more through secret manipulations, assassinations, and armed intervention. The characteristic symptoms of this era were the so-called anti-kings. The appearance of anti-kings was the surest sign of deep crisis and external intervention, which further worsened the nation's fate. And here comes the most shocking twist. When the Habsburgs came to the throne after the disaster of Mohács, the crazy, fast rhythm of Hungarian history suddenly slowed to a leaden crawl, and the sign of the fault lines reversed. The child kings disappeared, we see no more anti-kings, and the rulers suddenly lived to a peaceful old age. Why? According to the author, the explanation has a cold logic. With the entry of the Habsburgs, the very secret force that had previously conspired against the Hungarian kings managed to seize supreme power, so they became more protected against these destructive sieges. Once they grabbed the throne, the death zone moved away from the kings' heads and, tragically, shifted to the Hungarian people themselves. And for centuries, the nation was forced to defend itself on the open battlefield in armed freedom fights against its own disguised executioner kings. The numbers don't lie, and the rhythm, as we have seen, reveals everything. This was Endre K. Grandpierre's shocking opening. In the next episode, we will descend into the deepest, darkest mysteries of the deaths of individual kings. Remember, behind the surface of history, there is always another secret reality lurking. Welcome to the biggest crime scene in 1,000 years of Hungarian history. The location is the Carpathian Basin. The victims are the rulers of the House of Arpad. Just as a modern forensic investigator examines bloodstains and DNA, today we, based on Grandpierre K. Endre's brilliant research, will look at official history through the microscope of numbers, statistics, and logical contradictions. Join me for the shocking chapters of the second overview, where every royal death is a separate criminal file. Let's start with the very first, most painful point. According to official foreign theories, the son of our King Saint Stephen, the heir to the throne, Prince Emmerich, fell victim to a wild boar during a hunt. The Hungarian chronicles, however, are tellingly silent about the details. Just think about it. A perfectly healthy, battle-hardened prince who was meant to take the crown suddenly dies. Modern criminology would call this a perfectly timed political assassination. King Stephen is so broken by his son's death that he soon falls ill. And to make the tragedy and chaos complete, Vasul, who was secretly intended to be the new heir, is captured on the Queen's orders, blinded, and lead is poured into his ears to make him unfit to rule. What dark forces infiltrated the court to carry this out with impunity? Helpless, Saint Stephen could only quickly smuggle the remaining relatives, Andrew, Bella, and Levente, out of the death zone. The great king then passed away under unclear, hushed-up circumstances. After Saint Stephen's death, hell breaks loose. Trampling the rules of the blood oath into the mud, a foreign adventurer of Venetian-German descent, Peter Orseolo, seizes power. He is the first ruler who openly strives to ruin the Hungarians and turn the country into a foreign colony, offering the country as a fief to the German emperor. But the nation's immune system was still working back then. A nationwide uprising sweeps away the usurper and raises Samuel Abba to the throne. But foreign interests do not rest. In the Battle of Mainful, against Holy Roman troops, Samuel Abba is on the verge of victory, but a group of bribed Hungarian nobles treasonously lays down their arms. Samuel Abba is forced to flee, but is killed by assassins in a cave in his own homeland. The people, however, knew exactly who the real hero was. When his grave is opened years later, according to the chronicles, his body is uncorrupted and his wounds are completely healed. The next act is a true absurdity of an accident. Andrew I, the Catholic, comes to the throne, followed by his brother, the strong-handed creator of an economic miracle, Bela. During Bela's short, mere 3-year reign, the country begins to rise to unprecedented wealth. But just as he is preparing for a campaign against the German emperor, in Domus, pay close attention, his throne collapses on him and crushes him to death. Let's stop for a moment. A massive royal throne built of thick beams just collapses on its own and crushes the ruler with such surgical precision that no one else is hurt. This was one of the most brilliantly executed mechanical assassinations of the Middle Ages, a deadly trap that stopped the national rise. After Bela's death, a young boy, the 10-year-old Solomon, comes to the throne. He is the perfect puppet king. He is brought in with foreign weapons, under the watchful eye of the German emperor and his mercenaries. He is a ruler who, even as an adult, is not his own master, but as the chronicles whisper, remained the plaything of an evil count named Vid. A significant part of Solomon's reign consisted of bringing foreign armies against his own homeland. When he finally loses power and the people's trust after the defeats, he simply walks into a dark forest and, as if swallowed by the earth, is never seen again. But let's move on. The young and brilliant Geza I, King Magnus, is next. While he was still alive, the traitors held a secret meeting about him in Sexard. Behind a slightly open alcove, Abbot William of Italy overhears the chilling plan. Ambush Geza under the cover of night and blind him. Despite the heroic warning, Geza is betrayed by his own embedded advisors. And when he finally becomes king, in the midst of a series of peace negotiations after a long feast, what a coincidence, he suddenly falls ill and dies in his prime after a 3-year reign. Modern toxicologists would probably immediately suspect arsenic or plant-based nerve agents. The negotiating table was much deadlier to the Arpads than the battlefield. Then came St. Ladislaus, who forged a European superpower out of the chaos once again. But his glorious reign was also cut short by a sudden, inexplicable illness on the Bohemian border. Then came Koloman the book lover, the scholarly king. How many believe he was merely a man of peaceful books? Yet Koloman constantly had to fight the bloodiest intrigues, Byzantine and German influence. To protect the empire, he was forced to take drastic steps against internal pretenders to the throne. One of the most bizarre anomalies in history is the case of the young King Stephen II. The king suddenly falls ill with dysentery, sometimes on his deathbed, sometimes feeling better again. Just when he finally declares, "I am better," according to the Chronicle, his Cuman bodyguards, who adore him, rush into his tent and, kissing his hand in their joy, listen. They hug and squeeze the patient so much that he relapses into the illness and dies. Seriously? They hugged the king to death. A criminal investigator immediately sees the classic cover-up, blaming a brutal physical assault on the dearest bodyguards, while the real culprits leaned back in relief. Then came Bela the Blind, who may have been poisoned during a long wine-drinking session, despite his wife, the strong-willed Queen Helena, being by his side the whole time. Geza II also danced in the death zone. His reign was a minefield. Frederick Barbarossa of Germany and the Byzantine Emperor, Manuel, constantly incited internal rebels against him. And now we have arrived at the most terrifying intellectual and political mafia war of the 12th century. Foreign powers are no longer just sending armies, but anti-kings to Hungary. Archbishop Lucas of Esztergom, who is almost the master of life and death in the country, opposes Ladislaus II, who was put on the throne as a Byzantine puppet. And during a mass, the archbishop openly throws it in the king's face. "Within 40 days, you will be dead." And lo and behold, the young, healthy king dies on the 40th day without any illness. A prophecy, or a cold, calculated action by the medieval Secret Service. The same fate awaited the other puppet king, Stephen IV. He was poisoned during a healing bloodletting during the siege of Zimonj Castle by Byzantine interests, when his existence became an embarrassment. Archbishop Lucas also predicted death for another of his opponents, Stephen III, who, according to rumor, was finished off with poison hidden directly in the most sacred relic, a holy host. Out of the chaos emerged King Emmerich, whose personal courage was impressive. But despite his personal charisma, the ruthless background games caught up with him too, and he left the throne to his 5-year-old son, Ladislaus III. But do you remember the formula? A 5-year-old Arpad child on the throne equals a death sentence. A year later, the little boy was already resting in his grave. His path was cleared so that the frequently rebellious Andrew II could finally take the throne. Andrew's son, Bela IV, however, became the greatest survival artist in Hungarian history. He survived the hell of the Mongol invasion and internal betrayals. The night before the Battle of Mu, a rebellion was incited against him in his camp. and in the battle, the Mongols specifically targeted his life. And when he fled to the border, Duke Frederick of Austria immediately lured him into a trap. Bela ruled until the age of 64 because, with his brilliant mind, he learned to avoid every trap of assassins, rebels, and external empires. But his son, Stephen V, was not so lucky. His little boy, the heir to the throne Ladislaus, was kidnapped by foreign interests. And the desperate pursuit drove the father to his grave at just 33. And so the child became King Ladislaus IV, the Cuman. He realized that the official court and the papal legates were actually working to strangle the nation. So he turned to the Cumans, the nomads of the steppe, for support. But the network does not tolerate independence. The papal legate executed, and shortly after, according to the chronicle, what a cause and effect relationship. The king is slaughtered in his own tent. And the most devilish move, they blamed the murder on the very Cumans he loved the most. After the murder, the baptized Palatine Misa immediately executed every Cuman in the area, even the infants, so that not a single eyewitness would remain. And finally, the last act, the secret of the sealed coffins. At the funerals of several of our Arpad kings, the body, especially the face, was carefully hidden from the public. What kind of revealing wounds or poison-induced changes had to be hidden from the eyes of the people? Andrew III, the last golden twig, entered this dark, suffocating atmosphere. Although he tried to bring order among the oligarchs tearing the country apart, on January 14th, 1301, he too suddenly closed his eyes. With this death, the House of Arpad became extinct for good, and the country became free for the era of the kings of mixed houses, where the struggle for survival took an even more brutal form. Join us next time when we step onto the toxicological and political minefield, the Turks, the Luxembourgs, and the Hunyadas. Until now, we thought we knew the past. We have seen that history has its own unique, murderous rhythm. When a foreign secret force gets its hands on the country, kings suddenly start dropping like flies. The sacred bloodline of the Arpads became extinct in 1301. But did the killing machine stop? Not at all. In fact, it's only now shifting into a higher gear. We enter the third overview, the era of the kings of mixed houses. The first two attempts, the reigns of the children Wenceslaus and Otto, were mere flashes in the pan. Wenceslaus is brought from Bohemia, but the pressure is so great that he soon flees, and is later murdered under mysterious circumstances. Otto's fate is no better. He is stripped of the crown and ends up as a cursed fugitive. The Hungarian throne is a meat grinder, and the gears are turned from behind the scenes. Then comes Charles Robert. He finally restores order, crushes the oligarchs, and rules for more than 3 decades. But wait a minute. The official chronicles, when writing about his death, suddenly start speaking in riddles. They fill pages with empty phrases, but the exact cause of death is carefully concealed. They only say, he suffered in a severe illness that tormented him in his legs. Gout? Or something darker? Modern toxicology knows the symptoms of slow, gradual arsenic or lead poisoning, which cause paralysis and muscle pain. The chronicler's flood of words is actually a gigantic smokescreen designed to cover up a carefully executed, slow assassination. And what about his son, the famous Louis the Great, whose empire was washed by 3 seas? He died at 56. By the standards of the time, he might have been considered old, but the Chronicle of Kukule is again suspiciously brief. He departed at the call of the Lord, they say. But before that, a comet appears in the sky. In the coded language of the Middle Ages, this is always a symbol of unusual, dark events. Louis also struggled with the same mysterious, paralyzing leg pains as his father. The symptoms are identical. The secret network seems to have passed the poison cup from father to son. The Hungarian Empire was at its peak, but the king's body had already become the battlefield of an invisible war. After the death of Louis the Great, the throne passes to his daughter, Mary. However, a female ruler is a thorn in the side of many, and fate, or something else, soon intervenes. According to the official version, the pregnant Queen Mary goes for a ride in the forest, falls from her horse, and dies. But let's stop with the logic of a forensic investigator. A queen, who is also expecting a child, never, ever rides alone. Where were the bodyguards? Where was the escort? The chronicles reveal that at the moment of the accident, everyone happened to fall behind. Mary was intentionally isolated. This is the basic rule of political assassinations. Separate the victim. The Hungarian branch of the House of Anjou is cut down by a brutally staged accident at the edge of the forest. At the height of the chaos, Charles the Short enters the scene, who is king for only 39 days. Here, they don't even bother with poison. Mary's mother, Queen Elizabeth, and Palatine Garai lure the unsuspecting usurper directly into the queen's suite. While the queen chats with a smile, the Palatine brings in an assassin. Balázs Forgás, with a sword pulled from under his cloak, splits the king's skull in two with a single blow, right in front of the Italian bodyguards. This is not politics. This is a hardcore mafia hit in 14th century Buda. The Hungarian throne really is the most dangerous place in Europe. Let's jump forward in time. Sigismund of Luxembourg, who was both king and Holy Roman Emperor, ruled Europe for 50 years. In 1437, he is in Prague, the land of the Hussites. Sigismund knows exactly that his death warrant has already been signed. His body is weakening rapidly, and he realizes, if he stays in Prague, he will be poisoned, and his escort will be massacred too. What a scene! The master of the world, with a green wreath on his head, in a litter, flees from a city of his own empire with a handful of his Hungarian loyalists. But the poison is already in his system, and Sigismund dies on the way, during the escape. The hand of the secret forces reached even under the imperial cloak. His successor, Albert of Habsburg, lasts only 2 years. In a military camp in Nesme, he suddenly falls ill with dysentery, allegedly after eating too much cantaloupe. Cantaloupe? Please, you don't take down a perfectly healthy man with a little fruit. Dysentery, meaning brutal diarrhea and internal bleeding, was the favorite alibi of medieval assassins, used to disguise the symptoms of heavy metal poisoning, such as arsenic. Albert did not die of indigestion, but in a political murder. Then we have the young Vladislaus I, a king barely 20 years old. We are on the battlefield of Varna. John Hunyadi is almost winning the battle when the young king, in a completely incomprehensible way, breaks away from the main forces and throws himself directly into the thick of the Janissaries. His horse is cut down and the king's head is displayed on a Turkish spear. Was it recklessness? Or did someone from his own camp egg him into this suicidal charge? The king's death was convenient precisely for those who wanted chaos again instead of a strong central power. And speaking of the young ones, Ladislaus the Posthumous. A 17-year-old, perfectly healthy young man is preparing for his own wedding in Prague. Then suddenly, before Christmas, an unknown illness takes him in 36 hours. Rumors speak of bubonic plague or leukemia, but the reality is much darker. Ladislaus the Posthumous received a poison that ate away his body in a day and a half. And who administered it? Rumor accused George of Podjebrady, the Bohemian governor, who seized the Bohemian throne immediately after Ladislaus's death. The formula is simple: kill the king, get the country. And now comes one of the greatest mysteries in history. Matthias Hunyadi, the Just, the Raven King. 1490, Vienna. Matthias sits through a ceremony for 6 hours without food or drink. He is intentionally starved. When he finally gets a bowl of figs, they are allegedly stale and spoiled. Matthias takes a bite, and at that moment he flies into a rage from the terrible taste. And what happens next? Queen Beatrice, the loving wife who had let him starve until now, suddenly starts stuffing the writhing king with all kinds of drinks and food. The official version is apoplexy, but a stroke does not cause screaming pain for 3 days. The doctors present do not even dare to touch him. Everyone knew the king was doomed. The revenge of Venice and imperial interests caught up with Europe's most effective ruler. After Matthias came Vladislaus II, the famous King Dobje. It was said of him that he was like someone whose hair the nobles held in their fists. The country is sinking rapidly. But his most brutal move happens in 1515. He signs a secret treaty with the Habsburgs that if his son dies childless, the Hungarian throne will pass to the Habsburgs. This is what we call a death contract. Vladislaus did the dirty work, and what a coincidence! A few months later, he is dead. The bankers and secret powers no longer needed him. The Moor has done his duty, the Moor can go. And so we arrive at the darkest hour, Mohács. According to official history, the 20-year-old King Louis II drowned in the Seychelles Creek. But just think about it. A trained knight with an elite bodyguard drowns in a small creek, and his companions simply leave him there. Endre K. Grandpierre's brilliant analysis tears this lie to pieces. Louis did not die in the battle. He survived. He fled with 2 companions, but one of them, the Bohemian Ulrich Setrich, who was the ex-queen's man, made sure the king would never return home. What happened after the battle is a complete comedy, if it weren't so tragic. 3 months later, they find the king's alleged body in the swamp. But the corpse is completely intact, not decomposed. Even more absurd, they don't recognize him by his face, but by the mysterious marks on his teeth. And in a way unprecedented in history, Louis II is buried twice in Székesfehérvár, organized by 2 different political factions. The dead king's body also became just a prop in the power game, part of a huge cover story that paved the way for the Habsburgs. The country splits in 2. John Zápolya becomes the Hungarian king, but under pressure he also signs his own death contract in the Treaty of Várad. If he has no son, the throne goes to Ferdinand. But King John makes a mistake. In 1540, a son is born to him. The treaty is broken, and the secret forces act immediately. Zápolya, just 11 days after his son's birth, during the celebration, suddenly collapses to the ground after a drink and dies. Even his own doctor flees in haste. The coincidences work with pinpoint accuracy once again. And if you think this is unique to the Dark Ages, let's jump forward in time. 1990, the end of the First World War. The last Habsburg ruler, Charles IV, spends only 2 years on the throne. He is forced to abdicate, exiled, and dies at barely 35. The tragic Hungarian rhythm, the Symphony of Fallen Kings, ends with him. Are these coincidences? Illnesses, accidents, or a cold, calculating, centuries-spanning geopolitical chess game, where Hungarian kings were just pawns that could be knocked off the board at any time? The secrets of the past lie underground, but the numbers, statistics, and common sense reveal everything to those who know how to read between the lines. History is never what it seems. The Secret History of the Hungarian series, and specifically the manuscript of royal assassinations, was completed back in the mid-1980s. However, its publication was blocked in 1985 by the cultural policy of the Kadar era, and the state party censorship machine. For official Marxist historiography, the work was deemed too nationalist, breaking with accepted dogmas, and subversive. The book was finally published only after the regime change, with the end of censorship in 1991. Endre K. Grandpierre published the work himself under the auspices of the Titok Faitu publishing house, which he founded, showing that traditional publishers and academic circles still kept their distance from the subject at that time. Since its publication, the book has been one of the most interesting, deeply polarizing phenomena in the Hungarian book market and historical thought. Its reception is sharply divided into two camps. First, the academic stance of official historical science, pseudo-history and conspiracy theory. The vast majority of professional historians reject the book's methodology. They believe Grandpierre uses the partial information of medieval chronicles and reading between the lines in an excessive, speculative way. The lack of contemporary realities. Critics point out that in the Middle Ages, due to high infant mortality, lack of hygiene, undeveloped medicine, and devastating epidemics, such as dysentery, smallpox, plague, the average life expectancy was already low. According to historians, it is a mistake to immediately attribute every sudden fatal illness to political assassination and poisoning by foreign powers, Byzantium, Venice, the Holy Roman Empire. Second, the stance of alternative history researchers and the general public. A cult book. Among the post-regime change readership searching for their national roots, the book was a huge success. Many felt that Grandpierre was finally speaking the suppressed truth, exposing how foreign interests had ruined the Hungarian people. Brilliant investigative logic. His admirers and his son Attila Grandpierre, who carries on his intellectual legacy, find fascinating the investigative, statistical, and forensic logic with which the author points out the abnormally short reigns and suspicious deaths of the Arpad and Mixed House kings. Endre K. Grandpierre's work, Royal Assassinations, is much more than a simple history book. It is a historical thriller written with burning passion, national concern, and dramatic power. The author outlines a fascinating, thousand-year geopolitical chess game in which Hungarian kings were often just sacrificable pawns on the board of world powers, the papacy, German emperors, Venetian bankers, and Byzantium. Whether we accept his statistical proofs from an academic perspective or not, the book's greatest merit is undeniable. It shakes the reader up. It forces us not to settle for the boring, superficial memorization of dates and names, but to ask the most important question: qui prodest? Who benefited? The book's dark, suffocating atmosphere, the depiction of puppet kings, poisonings, and court intrigues make the tragedy of the Hungarian ruling houses so poignantly real, which is rare in Hungarian literature. It guides us into a secret reality where history is not a pile of dusty files, but a brutal, life and death struggle of flesh and blood people for survival and power.